Hello and welcome to the Sonic Cinema podcast. My name is Brian Scuttle and thank you for joining me at www.sonic-cinema.com. Join us at the Sonic Cinema Patreon at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. For $3 or more, you get content such as exclusive previews of the book that I'm writing, looks at reviews before they show up on Sonic Cinema for older movies, and much more, including in-depth looks at pieces that I've written over the years. That is at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema. I'm pleased today to be joined once again by a friend and filmmaker, Chris Esper. His most recent film, Imposter, is starting to make the rounds, and it's a wonderful short film. It's one of my favorite films of 2018 so far. Today, we are following up a series, a couple of podcasts that he and I have already done on Martin Scorsese's Faith trilogy, as well as the work of Andrei Tarkovsky, which came out earlier this year, with another look at a filmmaker that we both really admire, and that is the French New Wave critic turned filmmaker Francois Truffaut. He of The 400 Blows, Stolen Kisses, Day for Night, The Green Room, and many more. We'll be talking a little bit about a couple of specific movies, but we'll also be delving into some of his other movies for a larger perspective on his work in general. So please join me in welcoming back to the podcast, Chris Esper. Today, I'm pleased to be joined once again by a writer-director who I've come to know quite a bit through his work, as well as his frequent appearances on the podcast. This, I think, is his fourth now. And he just started screening for critics his short film Imposter, which is really wonderful. If you have a chance to see it, by all means, see it. It is one of my favorite films of the year so far. And today we are going to be discussing, similar to our Scorsese discussion as well as our Tarkovsky discussion, we're going to be discussing a filmmaker that we both really admire and some films of theirs that we really admire. And please join me in welcoming Chris Esper back to the podcast. Chris, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to be back again. Always enjoy discussing directors and films with you. So, yeah, it's always wonderful.
Yeah, and I really like that this has sort of become a regular thing for us. I mean, you're going to be joining me next year on something that I'm doing with 1999 films, and we're going to be discussing a couple of the really interesting ones there. And so I'm really looking forward to those discussions. But today we are here to discuss one of the more popular filmmakers, I think, as far as world cinema when it comes to American audiences. I know for me, I mean, my first, I think probably, I would imagine both of us probably have the same first introduction to Francois Truffaut, in that he played a supporting role in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yep.
By that point, he had been well regarded as a critic of the French New Wave turned filmmaker, with filmmakers like with films like The 400 Blows and Shoot the Piano Player, Jules and Jim, Stolen Kisses, Day for Night, some of which we're going to be discussing at relative length today. Before we sort of dive into the conversation, other than Close Encounters, which is kind of an easy one for both of us, what was your first experience with Truffaut as a director?
So this is fascinating. So obviously Close Encounters was my first exposure. At the time, having not known who Francois Truffaut even was, I remember his character stood out to me very much, though. Mm-hmm. That was one of those, that movie I remember standing out. But my having done research on him and realizing that he was not only an actor of sorts, but he was primarily a director and film critic. And then from there, I had read his interview with Alfred Hitchcock,
Mm-hmm.
which I have. It's a wonderful book. It's like just 300 pages of like cinephile greatness. You know, it's just it's incredible. But as far as directors go, I think the first film I ever saw of his was in fact Day for Night. That was my first
Mm-hmm.
exposure to, and I've come to see some of his other films, such as The 400 Blows, which is his first film, of course, and it's beautiful and fabulous, and
Yes.
just all across the board, just a fantastic movie. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my first film of his, I've not sat down to read Hitchcock Truffaut yet, but I do own the book. I just haven't had a chance to read it. I
yeah.
did see the documentary from a couple of years ago, which was
Oh, yes.
fascinating.
Yes.
I and it made me even more curious to actually read the book.
Yeah.
And I love the thing that I think is so identifiable, so recognizable with Truffaut, and one of the things that made him such an impactful director on a lot of fans as well as filmmakers like Spielberg is the fact that he was very much affectionate towards the old school filmmakers. I mean,
Yes.
it's well known that he, you know, and that's one of the things that was so unique about the French New Wave is the fact that him, along with Jean-Luc Godard and Andrei Bazin, who was the founder of Cashier de Cinema, they basically elevated the director as basically the author the uh, of the movie with their auteur theory, and I think that's one of the things that was always so accessible with Truffaut. And one of the things I mean, there's a famous quote where he said that he demands that a film basically it basically reveal the joy of making films or the agony of making films. He's not really interested in anything in between.
Right.
And that really does come through in all of his films.
Oh, yes.
It's funny because of the fact that your first one was Day for Night. Day for Night is actually one that I had to watch for the sake of this episode, which is one, and we'll go ahead and start to get into Day for Night, which is an absolutely wonderful film.
It is.
I'm not sure it's up there with, it's definitely one of my favorite Truffaut films. Definitely, maybe even my favorite one after seeing it for the first time. I have a soft spot when it comes to uh, movies about making movies. And I mean, that's always fun to see different people riff on that idea. And Truffaut really does an interesting job with it.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Just a minute. I'm having some technical issues here before we get into that. The thing that's so great about Day for Night as a fan of film is that it's a movie about the art of making movies, and plenty of people played with that idea. Fellini with 8.5. There's The Bad and the Beautiful. There's something like Bowfinger. There's Ed Wood. There's so many. Disaster Arts was another one,
Sure.
most recent. It's a very it feels like it's something that a lot of filmmakers really enjoy digging into, and one of the fun things is seeing how those different filmmakers approach it. And the thing that I like about Truffaut's film, other than the fact that he decided to make himself the stars as the director of the film being made, is it plays very much like a documentary.
Right.
And if you didn't necessarily know that it was a narrative feature, it would work as, you would almost swear it was a documentary about the making of film. It's so natural.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. That was I remember my first time seeing it and thinking this is like a documentary. Just the way the camera moved and just the way the actors were interacting with each other. It just didn't feel like a narrative picture. It felt like a that we were seeing this actually happen
Yeah.
and seeing it unfold. And to be fair, the film that's within the film is very much a Truffaut-esque kind of film. Meet Pamela. It is very
Hmm.
much sort of Jules and Jim sort of style where it is a love triangle, just like Jules and Jim is, you know.
Yeah.
And so, so you have this really interesting duality, and I can't help but feel like that Truffaut in that movie is really just playing himself.
Oh yeah, yeah, and he's. I mean, Close Encounters. You see how very natural he is in front of the camera, and I mean, Day for Night came out before Close Encounters.
Right.
He is such a natural actor. It's like it's one of the, and it's actually something. Uh, the fact that he's the lead in the film sort of plays into the other film of his that we're going to be discussing at length today, where he's also the star of that movie.
Right.
And he's it's such an he would, if he wasn't a director, he would be a fascinating character actor.
Oh yeah.
And I think he would make a really successful career as a character actor. That's how natural he is as an actor in all of the movies that he appears in. I mean, that goes with Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the whole movie had a very, for me, a very sort of familial type of quality to it, where everybody on the set, they felt like members of a family. And that's how it is when you really are making a movie, at least from my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one of the movies that I watch when I'm prepping for a movie because I just need that inspiration. Even though as we see in the movie, their production within it is, breaks down. There's plagued with problems and issues. Without giving too much away, but there is definitely a plot twist that certainly affects the making of the film within the film, and they have to find a workaround for it. And it's just like, it's a thing that you always dread as a director. And there's one scene in particular which I've always loved, and I quoted it in my book, The Filmmaker's Journey, when Truffaut is walking around the studio lot and all these people are coming up to him asking him questions and making requests, and he's just in his mind talking about what it means to be a director. That scene is just fabulous, and that scene totally encompasses what it truly means to be a director. And I felt that time and time again, and still do, because it's really true. As he says, that it's like taking a vacation somewhere, but you never reach a destination. That's really what it's like.
Right. Yeah, and I love. I mean, it makes sense that Truffaut's the director here. I mean, really, nobody else could play that role in this particular movie. I think some of my favorite beats of his. One is at the very beginning when they're trying to figure out a car for an accent they're supposed to do online.
Yes.
On screen, and he points to the production manager's car, and he says, "I don't think he'll mind." That's one of my favorite lines, and it's like it's one of my favorite moments, and something that really stood out to me is really kind of hilarious, and because it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I mean, I could see a director, I could see a director just saying that. It's like, oh, he won't mind. It's like,
won't mind, yeah.
And also the scenes dealing with the pregnant actress and the way they work around that, and that's one of the, and that's one of those really entertaining things. And the thing that I kept going back to, and I forgot this movie when I was talking about movies about making movies. I wonder whether David Mamet had this film in mind when he made State and Maine.
Oh yes,
because structurally it's very similar. There are a lot of similar beats played between the two movies. I certainly think both of them are fantastic movies. If you haven't seen State and Maine, it's well worth checking out.
Without doubt.
And it's really hilarious, and it's another example of how different filmmakers find different things. And it's like it's amazing to me that Truffaut made this film, and it's like we're talking about him being the director, and he's very much the star of it. But ultimately, this is an ensemble film, and that's something that really impressed me about it, is that nobody really, even though we're pointing to Truffaut a lot of the ways, and Jacqueline Bisset is in it, and Jean-Pierre Loud, who was in 400 Blows and Stolen
Well, yep.
Kisses. Those are basically the main characters in the movie. Nobody really outshines everybody else, and just
No,
everybody's so wonderful in this movie.
I agree. Yeah, I think if anything, Truffaut as an actor in the movie is sort of a supporting character, and he's sort of the glue that keeps these people together. If anything else, I mean, and the film and your film, you're right, is filled with like just a lot of just hilarious moments, like the scene where they're trying to get the cat to lick the milk and they can't get the
Yes.
cat. Can't get the, oh my god, that scene had me rolling. It's
hmm
funny.
Yeah. And at the same time, you've got this one scene early on where they're trying to get Severine to get a scene right.
Hmm.
And we start to see that there's something pretty serious that she's dealing with that's very personal. And the way that Truffaut brings that out, and the fact that that scene works on so many different levels,
It does.
and why she isn't quite able to get that scene just right, and why what's bothering her, and the way just everything about the way Truffaut shoots that scene is just it's beautiful, and it shows a lot of respect on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
And and another thing that I point out that I wrote down that I really liked is when you see the little moments where the actors are talking to reporters and stuff like that, and
Yep.
they're all talking about what they think the movie is about, and they're
Right.
basically just seeing it from their character's point of view. It's like that.
That's right.
It's so perfect and just so indicative of how
I
actors are when it comes to
Yeah.
the type of movie that they're making. So
Right. Right. And it goes back to what you said about it being like a documentary because a lot of the behaviors that each character exhibits is that of what you witness on any movie, be it an independent picture or a or a Hollywood production or what have you.
mm-hmm.
Uh, it's certainly just very similar. The director is there just trying to get his vision on screen or her vision on screen, and here you have all these cast of characters. There's there's sort of a story or a movie on its own during the making of the movie because there's just so much that goes into it, and I love those little moments. I agree, and also too, we also can't forget the those really cool flashback sequences when Truffaut is napping, sleeping at night, and we get the black and white scenes with presumably him as a child, the
Yes.
director
Yes.
as a child, and you see him constantly going to this theater, and he eventually takes pictures from Citizen Kane's
Yes.
publicity photo, which is something Truffaut actually did as a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And he and with the and he was his I think it was yeah, and he was one of the first ones who it was with the directors of the French New Wave when you had movies like Citizen Kane and movies like Touch of Evil from Wells really start to take their place as these are some of the great movies of all time. And it
Yeah.
was under their appreciation of the movies.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I like about Day for Night in particular is that Truffaut, and I mean, it really goes back. It really goes to any Truffaut movie. Really, I can't
Yes.
say that there's one that I feel like isn't there. I mean, there are still a few that I haven't seen,
Yeah.
but I feel like Truffaut is a filmmaker who it's hard for him to be genuinely cruel. I
Yeah.
think to his actors, I think to his characters, I should say. I think
Yes.
he really loves the characters that he is putting on screen, and he wants to see them succeed
Yeah.
in whatever they're doing, whether it's something like Day for Night, whether it's something like Jules and Jim, whether it's something like
Mhm.
even Fahrenheit 451
Yeah.
or 400 Blows. I mean, he really has affection for his characters, and that's one of the things that really I think is also very representative of him and why so many people respond to him as a filmmaker.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because I remember last year discussing with a friend our favorite filmmakers, and in my top 10 was Truffaut, My friend's response to me was, yeah. My friend's response was, yeah. I never really got into French cinema. I always found French cinema to be very cold. And I was like, interesting, because Truffaut, in my opinion, is a very emotional filmmaker, a very personal filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Unlike Godard, not, Godard is great, but their styles are just sort of different. I would say that Truffaut was certainly has a French sensibility, obviously without question, but he also
Mm-hmm.
had that. But he also had sort of an American sensibility, I feel like, in his approach to filmmaking, because he loved American cinema.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if yeah, I mean, if your friend's thinking solely about like Godard in that respect when it comes to French cinema, yeah, I can understand where he's coming from as
I
far as
agree.
thinking that it's kind of cool because as much as what I've seen of Godard is really good, it
Yeah,
is very cold in comparison to what Truffaut does. And yeah, it's one of those things where it's like I'm still just very much skimming the surface of the French New Wave and French
yeah,
cinema in general. It's like there's still gulfs of it that are missing, and I mean that goes for Truffaut as well. I'm probably further
sure.
along with Truffaut than I am with other filmmakers, but yeah, I mean he's somebody who I don't know if I would put him in my top 10, but I mean he's definitely in my top 20 right now as
Yeah,
far as favorite films, like their favorite filmmakers. I mean there's such a warmth to the way he works with actors. There's such a warmth to the stories that he's telling. There's
yes,
such a such a beauty to the way he tells them that
yeah,
is it's really interesting to watch. And it, although I will say I mentioned Fahrenheit 451 earlier,
yep,
it's interesting. I watched Day for Night about a month after I watched Fahrenheit 451 for Sonic Cinema's movie a week. And I wanted to do Fahrenheit 451 this year for Truffaut because of the fact that there was the HBO adaptation with Michael B. Jordan and Michael Shannon coming out. And it had been a while since I had seen Fahrenheit 451. Actually, Fahrenheit 451 was my first Truffaut,
oh,
but it's weird because of the fact that I don't watching it again. I don't feel like it's as much of a Truffaut film as like 400 Blows as Day for Night. It's a very different
yeah,
watch. It feels like you're watching a completely different filmmaker.
yeah. I gotta I That's interesting because I have yet to check. I have yet to see that one,
Mm-hmm.
but having said that, Truffaut certainly does have a style, film to film. You can watch like 400 Blows. You can watch The Green Room. You can watch Day for Night, Jules and Jim. All of those, you can tell who the filmmaker is.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really interesting watching Fahrenheit 451 where it's very obvious that he has interest in the material, but he's also I feel like he struggles with the material as well. And I think but having seen the HBO movie as well, I feel like that might be the material in general
Yeah,
because neither of them are overly successful. I think
right.
Truffaut probably gets it a bit closer.
Yeah,
The biggest problem with Truffaut's film is, for me, is that it's very obvious that the technology and the means did not exist to do a futuristic vision for the
yeah,
movie. It's
sure.
it's very obvious. It's like 1960s France or England or wherever he filmed it.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and of course we completely and so you haven't seen Fahrenheit 451. I am curious to see what you think about it
Yeah.
when you do
I'll have
get
to
a chance
watch
to
it.
see it.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think either adaptation is overly successful. I think both of them do interesting things with the material, but I don't think either one has quite gotten it. I think part of that is almost the material in general.
Yeah.
That might be a story that might be best uh, told on the page as opposed on screen.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, some adaptations of books to film. sort of suffer with that, where the ideas are either just way too big for film, or the director just simply didn't get the material that's within the text of the book.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that could be a very tough challenge. I'm sure for Truffaut, it was probably something that was just like territory that he probably wasn't even sure how to cover. If that sort of makes sense, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I would almost say that I understand why he chose that. I understand why he did. And I mean, it was it was a if I remember correctly, it was a universal production. So I mean, it was a
Yeah,
studio film. So it was something that obviously he was seeing about getting his foot in the door when it came to Hollywood. And of course, the next year, he was around that time he was one of the original choices for Bonnie and Clyde to
oh,
direct Bonnie and Clyde before Arthur Penn
right,
ended up making that movie.
sure,
And if you think about it, it's like that would have been I think if he had been able to make that, I think it's interesting to see where his career will have gotten after that,
yeah,
because I think that movie really will have been that's a movie that's more up his alley. I think as far as that type of filmmaking,
yeah,
and I mean you see things in. It's been years since I've seen Shoot the Piano Player, so I
yeah,
know a friend of mine absolutely loves that film. But you look at Jules and Jim, you look at the fact that it's like so many of his movies are character driven and
yes,
more about the story of the characters as opposed to larger society ideas. And I think that's where Bonnie and Clyde would have been a better fit than Fahrenheit 451.
yeah. No, I can definitely see that. I mean, honestly, I mean, you're talking about the time that's like, Bonnie and Clyde came out in '67, I want to say,
Yep.
and so yeah, so you're sort of on the cusp of the American art tour, where the American director was in full control of the money, in full control of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no studio interference. Francois Truffaut would have fit that system in there like a glove. He would have
Yeah.
just perfect for that specific
Mm-hmm.
era had he been in America, you know.
And it's interesting to think of, yeah, and it's interesting to think of what his career will have been like. I mean, what would imagine him in the same imagine him playing the French New Wave, which basically decided that the director was in fact the author of the film, and then you
Right.
have the American filmmakers inspired not just by that idea, but by the filmmakers that the French New Wave were
That's right.
discussing. I mean, the fact that one of somebody like Truffaut straddling both of those key points in cinema history is fascinating.
Yeah.
And I mean, you really you wish that you wish he might have gotten the chance, but at the same
Yeah.
time, you also you look at some of the films he made in that point after like Fahrenheit 451, after Bounty and Clyde came out. You have Stolen Kisses, which is
Yeah.
terrific. You have Day for Night, which is terrific as well.
Yep.
And I think The Wild Child is in there, which I have not seen yet.
I haven't seen that
Um,
one.
but and then you have a really curious film, and one that I was fascinated by when Roger Ebert brought up in his great movies review of the 400 Blows, called The Green Room,
Yes.
and it's based on a Henry James novel,
Mm-hmm.
and it is basically it stars once again Francois Truffaut, and he is a person who is fascinated by death.
Yeah.
He is fascinated by the dead, and he feels a kinship to the dead in a way that he doesn't really feel towards humans.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was so interesting in that Ebert mention of the movie in the 400 Blows review was the fact that he quoted another critic, I can't remember the name of the critic, who basically said that he looked at the Green Room as Truffaut's cinematic representation of the auteur theory of, and Truffaut basically being the auteur of this, the person that he was, and somebody who revered these filmmakers who had passed, and these filmmakers
Yes.
who had their time, who had lit the flame for him, and keeping their spirit alive. And
That's really, yeah, that's really fascinating because
mhm.
upon watching it, I didn't mean to cut you off, by
No,
the
you're
way,
fine. You're fine.
but upon watching it myself, because I know this was his last released film, I want to say, because I know he did attempt to film a movie before his death called Finally Sunday. I don't think it ever got completed though, but uh, so I sort of think of this as like almost like he knew in a way that this was going to be his last film. I just had that on my mind as I was watching it,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how that movie unfolded. It is just like it's his most touching and most somber film that I've seen of his,
Yeah.
and I mean that in the best of ways because it's
Mm-hmm.
like the most emotional, the most it's a shame that it didn't do good numbers at the box office, but the critics loved it.
Yeah. And it's really, and actually, he did have the last Metro after this.
That's right.
The
Yes.
last
Okay.
Metro came out after this. I'm not. I want to say he had one more in there, but I can't remember what it was.
Yeah. That's
But
right.
sadly, yeah, this was one of his last films, and Truffaut left us way too early in 1984 because
Yeah.
of brain cancer.
Brain cancer. Yeah.
And I really am curious to see what he will have done in his later years, whether he would have, because the Green Room, I had forgotten a lot of, I remembered how I felt about the Green Room. I'd
Yeah.
forgotten a lot about the fact that it feels very, the feel of it is very out of character for Truffaut, when especially when you compare it to like Day for Night or
Yeah.
Jules and Jim or 400 Blows. It's interesting. It feels like a Tarkovsky film. It feels like a
I,
Bergman film.
I was just gonna say there are specific shots in the movie that felt very Tarkovsky, that felt very Bergman. But in particular, there's a dolly shot
Mm-hmm.
when he first brings Cecilia to the chapel, and the camera does this really beautiful tracking shot. You see the candles, you see the gate, you see the gates in the foreground, and it felt like something out of nostalgia,
Yeah.
or even out of Stalker, in a way. It just felt like a very Tarkovsky kind of shot,
Mm-hmm.
very and the story is very Bergman-esque because Bergman did a lot of stories about death, about life, and so
Yes.
this movie felt like that, but with Truffaut at the helm, and man, does he pull it off!
Yeah, and one of the things that I found interesting rewatching it is that I wrote down, I feel like this is a character with post traumatic stress disorder.
Oh
And it's
yes,
not because of the fact that he dies, but it's because he's the only one who lived. And
right,
that goes back to the montage at the beginning of the movie, which is a montage of war footage.
yeah,
And this character who writes obituaries for a living basically is the only one of his friends who survived. I'm guessing World War II is
yeah,
the war that he survived.
yep,
And so it's really interesting, and this is part of where he's talking about the fact that it's like he feels like he knows more people who have died than are alive. And
right,
we all get to that point at a certain point in our lives, that
sure,
when you know it feels like we know more people who have passed on than more people who are currently alive. And the way that Truffaut brings this to the screen is, it's really beautiful, and it's really, there's a scene in there's a tension in terms of, there are two main tensions in the film that I think are fascinating. There's the tension that comes up when it comes to him writing the obituary for his
yep,
former best friend. But
yep,
there's also the tension in the way he and Celia view the living and the dead. They both have very specific interests in death, but
yes,
they approach it very differently. And the way he chastises it it's fascinating because of the fact that, especially watching the movie again in the current uh social media time that we're currently at, where fandom, if you're taking this as a representation of the auteur theory, this that scene with he and Celia and those clashing heads between them of how they view this similar thing is very similar to how you have people online who completely are vehemently disagreeing on movies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so weird to see that represented so beautifully in a way that you never really would subscribe to a filmmaker like Truffaut, but it's also, I mean, it does feel very much like a natural progression for Truffaut. It does obviously feel like a film made when he was starting to think of his own mortality. I don't know when
Yes.
exactly he was diagnosed from brain cancer. This came out in 1978.
Right.
So, I mean, it could be that he knew at that point, but he no doubt knew that he probably knew that he was closer to the beginning end of his life than the beginning. And
Right.
being able to, and when you see life that way, it really does shift your perspective. And I just, man, I fell in love with this movie all over again.
Oh yeah.
I was, and yeah, we were, it's like last week we were talking about, like last week I basically had to sort of, I had to do something. I had to basically burn my copy of this disc for you and send it to
Yeah.
you so you could
That's
watch it because it's not
yeah.
available. And that blows my mind that a Truffaut
Yeah.
film is basically unavailable right now. Except,
Yeah.
it,
That's unbelievable.
yeah,
That's unbelievable. What company put out the DVD copy that you have?
MGM.
Okay. Okay.
MGM, and I got it shortly after I think it came out because I was
Oh,
fascinated by it and nobody had available. So I bought it on Amazon. It was relatively inexpensive. I
yeah.
mean, it doesn't have anything on it but the movie, and that was like 7, 8 years ago or something like that. And so the fact that when you and I were going back and forth about it, how you were having a hard time tracking it down, I'm like, I look on Amazon, and sure enough, like it's not available except for being prohibitively expensive
Yeah. Oh
and
yeah.
region free. And so I'm really kind of curious to see if Criterion picks it up at some point. I'm kind of surprised they haven't picked it up by this point.
I am too because haven't seen it for the first time this week. I finished it and I was like, how has this not been picked up by Criterion yet?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful movie.
Well, and the fact of the matter is, it's taking them like, I don't know, 17, 18 years or so to finally reissue Andrei Rublev on Blu-ray.
True.
So I'm, if it takes a couple of years for them to get their hands on it, it's like I'm not going to complain, especially
Yeah.
considering what we're about to get with Andrei Rublev, which I'm terribly excited for because that sets everything I could have hoped for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the only thing I kind of wish, I mean, not to get on a Tarkovsky tangent, but I'm kind of curious. I kind of almost wish, because they're doing both the 205-minute original cut
Yep.
that they released originally, and then the 185 cut, which was actually the one that Tarkovsky officially endorsed. He
Oh,
officially ended up endorsing that one, the
yeah.
shorter cut, and it's been a while since I've seen that shorter cut. So I'm curious to see that. I really kind of wish they had also tracked down the 2 hour and 25-minute American release of it. And I'm the only reason I'm curious about that one is I don't think it's probably going to be a good movie at all. I'm just fascinated by what that would look like
Yeah.
as a 2.5 hour movie.
Right.
And I'm just curious about that. But yeah, I mean that's coming out in September from Criterion. I cannot
Oh,
wait,
fantastic.
and I cannot wait to finally own that on high definition on Blu-ray. It's like that. I'm so excited by the release, but I mean, yeah, I hope Criterion gets their hands on Green Room. I would imagine they will because I mean today they just announced out of nowhere a huge uh, Bergman box set with like
Really?
basic, yeah, with like every one of his films,
Wow.
including ones that they hadn't had before, like Hour of the Wolf, like Persona, like and Sarabond, his last film. And so I'm really, and it basically has everything on there, and it's like I would imagine it's only a matter of time before they get their hands on Green Room. I hope it's sooner rather than later because I would
I hope so
love to
too.
see.
Yeah.
I would love to hear uh, discussion. Of this. I would love to maybe see interviews with Truffaut about the movie.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, it's like there would be ones done at the time, but it's like I would love to know more. I would love to hear different perspectives on this movie because it's
Yeah.
such a beautiful film. It's such a fascinating film in his career. And it is
Yeah.
one where, like you said, I mean, it really does feel like somebody at the end of his life or realizing that his life is he's closer to the end of his life than
Right.
to the beginning of his life. And
Yeah.
I'm really I I love it. I'm glad I revisited for the podcast because of the fact that I hadn't seen it in a number of years, and
Yeah.
I kind of fell in love with it all over again.
I fell in love with it at first sight. I mean, it was just it really there was just so much to look at visually, and the and some of the dialogue that he writes.
Yeah.
Well, it's from the translation that I read, it's just like some really beautiful dialogue. I love the line where he said, "I love the not to give anything away, but the ending where she writes the letter and she says, you'll only love me if I were to be dead." That
Mm-hmm.
just, I was just like, whoa, and like there's just like beautiful piece of dialogue like that. But not only that, but there's also a great scene. The way he shoots this one particular scene, he goes to an artist who's made a wax figure of his deceased wife.
Yes.
And he looks at it, won't accept it, and then asks the artist to destroy it. Rather than going in for close-ups and we get this really over dramatic thing, he
Mm-hmm.
cuts for a wide shot through a window, and it was just like that moment actually had me more emotional than it would have been if had everything had been done in close-up
Oh
with
yeah.
intent.
Yeah. No, and yeah, that was and yeah, I'd almost forgot about that scene. And yeah, that is it's and yeah, that live dialogue is absolutely true about his character in that the idea that he loves people who are deceased more than he loves people who are alive. And it's
Yeah,
like one of the things that I think is so interesting about the movie and so interesting about his character is the fact that I feel like to a certain extent I think most everybody has these moments where we we find ourselves more attached to people who may have passed on than we do to people who are still living. And the
yeah,
fact that he's just given himself over to that feeling, and when you think about the fact that he's had to mourn his wife, he's had to mourn most of his friends, you understand where that's coming from, but he's also
yeah,
forgotten that you it's like even though he's still alive, he's forgotten to live. And that's
yeah.
that's that's one of the things that I think is that's part of where the tension comes from in that movie, and it's so beautiful.
I agree, and the movie also raises some very interesting questions, such as is this character, or do we as people, do we only remember the good things about said person that passed away, and do we erase all the negative stuff about them, or do we retain that? And like his character, it's interesting because there's this one particular character from his childhood that he felt betrayed by,
Mm-hmm.
although the movie doesn't get into how the betrayal happened very much, but yet despite this person's death, he still feels hatred towards this person,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's this interesting thing where, like, okay, like even after death, he can't forgive this one person.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that is actually an excellent point. That's the person that actually been asked by his editor to write an
Hmm.
obituary for, and he has a hard time with it. And when he does write the obituary, it's very brutal and harsh.
Yes. Yes.
And it's 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 not really that much of a surprise they would choose that lifestyle given that career given what he's doing. It's based on a Henry James story.
Yeah.
Um, the Altar of the Dead, I believe, is the story. Although I think there's another one. It's there are elements based on.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that whole tension, it just plays into exactly what we're talking about, is the idea of, you know, and you're exactly right. It's like, how much do we, when we think about people who have died, how much do we, what do we think about? And
Yeah.
I think that's an important part of remembering them. And
Yeah.
I think it's important to distinguish, well, what are we holding on to with regards to those people, and how are we remembering them, and how was the best way to remember them?
Yes.
And you know, and you know, there's so many different movies, and it's like it's like at this point, my all my grandparents have passed on. My father
Sure.
passed away almost 5 years ago, and it's one of those things where it's like you you do wonder how, I've had bouts of, with regards to my father's parents. It's like I miss them, of course, but I didn't really have too many memories that I held on to with them. With my
Yeah.
mother's parents, it was different, and I think I was probably closer to them than I was to
Sure.
my father's parents. And then with my dad, it's like you start to wonder, because my father, we had a few years when I was in Boy Scouts that we were probably the closest we've ever been.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are also other things that I remember. And so it's like, do I remember the estrangement? Not necessarily estrangement, but do I remember the moments where it's like we weren't maybe as close as we could have been, or do I hold on to the moments that do matter to me and that were important to me as far as our, as far as our relationship together? And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I think is so fascinating about Truffaut's character and what he's doing, and what Truffaut as a filmmaker is doing with this film.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and it's something that, I mean, if for filmmakers, I've got to think it's fascinating. And it's like, if you know the history of Truffaut, you know the history of how much he loved cinema, how much he loved
Hmm.
directors, how much he lionized directors like
Yeah.
Hitchcock, like Wells. It makes sense they would make a movie like this. And
Oh yeah.
he's almost putting a mirror up to himself and making, sort of holding himself in check.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. And on that point about his love for cinema and the fact um, that the movie has been seen as a representation of him lighting a candle of sorts
Mm-hmm.
uh, for the filmmakers that he once loved, in bringing up the scene where he writes an obituary that is brutal about his childhood best friend. Uh, Mind you, if you think about Truffaut's reality, by this time, him and Godard were no longer friends
Mm-hmm.
because after Day for Night had been released, and Godard thought it was like an inaccurate depiction of filmmaking, but more importantly of Truffaut, because he felt that, oh, if this was autobiographical, why didn't the director in the movie kiss his female leads? And you know, definitely alluding to Truffaut's own personal affairs. And so, in response, Truffaut wrote a letter to Godard, basically calling him a piece of shit, and that ended their friendship and partnership. So I almost wonder if that was even in a way sort of his autobiographical element of the obituary scene being uh, sort of a reference to Godard in that
Mm-hmm.
sense. I don't know. I mean, it could have been.
That's certainly an I mean, that would certainly track with the whole idea the film is inspired by the auteur theory and
Yeah,
how autobiographical it is probably with Truffaut, and it's like he is easily, I mean, we haven't even talked about 400 Blows,
yeah,
the films that in that series, which include Stolen Kisses,
yep.
and we haven't talked about Jules and Jim yet, which, I mean, he I would imagine that Truffaut is easily one of the most personal filmmakers in,
Without a
I
doubt.
mean, in filmmaking, in the history of filmmaking. I mean, there are other filmmakers like Scorsese, like Spielberg.
Sure,
Every filmmaker puts a piece of themselves in a film.
sure.
That I mean, that's part of the whole idea of the auteur theory. Is the
That's right.
whole idea is that the director is the author, and the author is basically the author is going to put a piece of themselves into the film
That's
that they're doing. So, but I mean, I don't know of any other filmmaker though is probably as nakedly uh, personal and authentic with it as Truffaut.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, throughout his films, between the the main character in 400 Blows, the fact that that particular character and actor has have reprised roles in his subsequent films
Yeah.
over time, that certainly says a lot. I think even in a sense, the flashback scene in Day for Night, I think that
Mm-hmm.
character, I mean, in all his films, there is a sense of childhood or a child in his movies that sort of represents a quote a simpler time or a time of innocence of discovery. Green Room, there's a young boy that's deaf, I believe, and
Mm-hmm.
he shows him slides, and again, and again, he has a projector. There goes again that magic of cinema, kind of sort of thrown in there with a subtle
Mm-hmm.
hand. It's in there, and then of course you have the flashback in Day for Night. Again, possibly the same character, 400 Blows. There's certainly that is Truffaut as a child. He's mentioned time and time again
Yeah.
how 400 Blows was basically a picture of what his childhood was like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and him and the actor returning to that character over and over again. It's like when people think about Linklater's before trilogy now.
Yes.
I mean, he wasn't the first person to do that. They weren't the first people to do that.
No.
And I mean, yeah, that was one of the things that was I love the fact that you've got somebody like Truffaut doing that, and I love the idea of that. I love the idea of checking in with these characters every few years to sort of give us a window into where they are, see who they are at a certain point in their lives, and it's like and of course Michael Apted did this in documentaries with the Up series,
Yeah.
and I'm probably a couple more years before we might get another one on that series, but that's going to be interesting. See if we do get 63 out, what that's going to look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And you watch these movies, you watch these characters as they progress, you see who they are, and it's with Truffaut, because of how personal of a filmmaker he is, it's not just those specific films, it's every film where
Yeah.
you're getting a window into who he is at that moment. And I mean, really, you could say that about any filmmaker. You can say that
Yeah.
about Scorsese, you can say that about Tarkovsky, you can say that about Bergman, you can say that about Spielberg, you can say that about all of them. And just how different, you look at how different Scorsese films were from, Taxi Driver to Goodfellas. You see
Right.
differences in Last Temptation of Christ to Silence. You look at
Yep.
Spielberg, when he did Jaws and Close Encounters, compared to the Spielberg who made Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. And then
Yep.
now you've got,
So,
Ready
yeah.
Player One and The Post. It's like you've got very different filmmaker each time. The person is the individual making is the same, but the person is different.
right. And I loved your comparison about the Before series because in talking about Richard Linklater, you could even say that 400 Blows and the subsequent films, in a way, is sort of like with Boyhood. We saw this little
Mm-hmm.
boy grow 12 years, and with 400 Blows to Stolen Kisses and Love at 20, and all those other Truffaut films with the same leading character, we saw this young man grow up into to the man that we saw in like Day for Night, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and the thing that was so striking is how much that actor I can't remember what I'm not even going to try to say his name because I know I'll mess it up.
Yeah,
It's striking just in Day for Night just how much he very much, especially seeing him and Linklater and Truffaut in scenes together, is striking just how much like a young Truffaut he looks.
I was just gonna say, yeah, he does look like a young
I mean, if
Truffaut.
you didn't know any better, it's like you would swear that he were Truffaut's son. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
and
how close they look.
I agree. And then even his character in Day for Night behaves in a very similar way. That sort of impulsive behavior,
Mm-hmm.
same exact behavior as in 400 Blows. That same sort of impulsive behavior, how he doesn't think before he does, and that's exactly what the character in 400 Blows was like.
Yeah. Well, I know. Did you get a chance to rewatch Jules and Jim?
Not recently, no.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I saw it for the first time a few months ago. I think yeah, it was in December actually.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's a really good film. I wouldn't I wouldn't put it up there with Day for Night or Green Room or
no, I wouldn't either. No.
but it's an interesting film. And I love the way he approaches the characters. I love the way he approaches the dynamics between the characters, and I love that there's a romantic part to it, but there's also a dark part of it in sort
Yeah,
of how that relationship between the three characters plays out.
right.
Yeah, I mean they're like I said earlier. I haven't seen Shoot the Piano Player in a few years. I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to seeing
I
that one
haven't.
again.
Yeah.
I want to see Last Metro. I want to see Wild Child. I want to see
Hmm.
all of his movies.
Oh, me
I
too.
mean,
Yeah.
he's a filmmaker that definitely speaks a lot to me on an individual level. I mean, I think anybody with a love of film who may not be comfortable with the idea of watching foreign films, I
Mm.
think Truffaut's probably the easiest entry point.
Yeah, he was my first entry into foreign
Mm-hmm.
cinema, along with like films like Cinema Paradiso,
Yeah.
uh, which I mean for me is like one of my all time favorites. And it's funny when I first saw 400 Blows, and then I saw Cinema Paradiso. I looked at Cinema Paradiso. There are elements of Cinema Paradiso that feel very much like 400 Blows. Certain
Mm-hmm.
elements of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And but I mean, as far as directors, I mean, yeah, definitely Truffaut is the easiest entry point. But I think I would also, even though it's a very different reason for me saying this one, I would say Kurosawa is another one. Just
Yeah.
because in his samurai films, just because of the fact
Yeah.
that
Would agree with that. Yeah.
American action films have been taking from Kurosawa for
Oh,
decades
sure.
now.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you like Star Wars at all, chances are you're gonna be a Kurosawa fan in one way or another, whether it's Hidden Fortress or Seven Samurai or
Yeah.
the Yojimbo and Sanjuro.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I feel like I heard that Lucas even uh, took sections of Seven Samurai and put it into his rough cut of Star Wars
Yeah.
to give the visual effects guys a
Mm-hmm.
reference for what he wanted
Yeah.
for the lightsaber sequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
and I mean there was an episode of there were few episodes of like Clone Wars and Rebels. I think that have basically taken the samurai Seven Samurai shape. I mean, you can once you see Hidden Fortress, if you haven't seen Hidden Fortress, you can tell the references to a new. you can definitely see the inspiration on New Hope in there.
Yeah.
And and for crying out loud, like Lucas helped get, along with Coppola, helped get financing for one of his later samurai films, Kagemusha.
Yeah.
And then you have Ron and Akira Kurosawa's Dreams, which actually I was thinking about when we were talking about The Green Room, which is another like late life meditation on life and death, which
Yeah.
is just really beautiful and personal from a filmmaker.
Yeah, I think that's when the Criterion released. Well, within the last year, it took a while for it to
Yeah.
finally get it released.
They released that last year. It's last year or the year before. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
one that I'm definitely looking forward to upgrading, because I think Dreams is beautiful. I think Dreams is, it's such an amazing visual movie.
Yeah.
And it's such a striking movie from Kurosawa. And I hope one day they get a Madedeo, which was, I think that was his last film. Came out a couple of years after Dreams, which is another just wonderful late Kurosawa film. And yeah, I mean we're I know we're supposed to be talking about Truffaut here, but I mean it's always we could always put in plugs to Kurosawa and other filmmakers.
Oh, sure.
I mean, we've talked about
Yeah.
Bergman and Tarkovsky. The fact of the matter is, it's like, for me, these filmmakers are formative for me as far as my entry into world cinema, my entry into sort of understanding how different filmmakers view the world. And that's one of the things that I think is so beautiful about people like Truffaut, and the fact that it's like you feel like you're going to learn something new about the world and maybe even about yourself.
I agree, 100%.
Well, thank you very much for joining me tonight. I really enjoyed this conversation. Admittedly, it's like and when we were talking about this this episode after the Tarkovsky one, it made me realize, like, this should have been really how we approached Tarkovsky as well, where we just pick a couple movies and just sort of go to larger discussions as needed as far as other films. But because I mean, the two films we did choose from Truffaut, Day for Night and Green Room, are so radically different, and but also very representative of the filmmaker in general. And so I know when I started thinking about, a couple of friends of mine are doing David Lynch soon, and it's like, well, this structure needs to happen with David Lynch too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like, if you just talk about like everything, it's gonna be like 6 hours, and that's just Twin Peaks. But yeah, Chris, thank you very much for joining me on this. I'd like to thank Chris for joining me again on the podcast. It's always good to have him on. It's always good to talk to him. We're planning on doing at least one more breakdown, this time of an individual movie, before the end of the year. Hopefully we'll get that going in November, December. And then he's going to be joining me a couple of times on my 2019 series, looking back on the films of the year 1999, which is a huge, ambitious project I'm working on. I've already got about 30 movies accounted for. I'm really looking forward to all of those discussions, and I'm really grateful to have filmmakers like Chris who are willing to join me on that. That's all for now. Join me again at patreon.com/Sonic Cinema for more. And until next time, this is Brian Scuttle. We've got a lot more episodes coming this year. This has been a busier than expected summer for the podcast, but it's definitely been a rewarding one. I've got a lot more really good conversations coming up. Thank you very much. And this is Brian Scuttle checking out for the Sonic Cinema podcast.